Hello there, and welcome back to Hydroponics Daily, your go-to podcast for everything soilless cultivation. I'm your host, Dr. Russell Sharp, the founder of Utrema Limited. Now, what if I was to tell you you could take a picture of a legal cannabis plant and before you harvest it and tell the active ingredient concentration in there, the cannabinoid concentration in the final product? You'd say I'm crazy, but there's a couple of bits of research that have just been, I've just been made aware of that potentially means you could do this. Not only could you do this, you don't necessarily need a fancy piece of kit. You could potentially do this with your smartphone. So I'm going to go into how you might be able to do that. And maybe a couple of you will want to play around with this and try if you are legal cannabis growers. So the first piece of research I came across was work done by the University of Adelaide in collaboration with a German tech company called Compolytics. And they've developed a non-destructive leaf scanning method that they say can accurately predict the cannabinoid concentration in the cannabis plants. So what it does is you take a picture and it's of the fan leaf, and it's called hyperspectral reflectance. So hyperspectral means across the whole light spectrum, all the wavelengths. You can buy hyperspectral cameras. They're very expensive. But this fan leaf hyperspectral, FLHR for short, involves taking measurements across the plant's canopy during early and late flowering, and it was found to reliably predict the final cannabinoid concentration. Now, that measurement is then overlaid with machine learning models trained on the results to achieve a predictive accuracy. It's not just a case of taking a picture and then it tells you the cannabinoid concentration. You then have to put it into some fancy models that come out with it, basically correlations. So this will probably be cultivar specific as well. It uses a handheld, non-destructive hyperspectral device that enables rapid in situ, so in the grow room, in the greenhouse, in the grow room, of intact fan leaves. So you don't need to do sacrificial sampling, which is always a problem when you're growing high-value crops. It uses specialized lighting and detectors to capture subtle differences in the light that's reflected from the plant's leaves, and every chemical and structure feature in the leaf, such as pigments, water, trichomes, sugars, reflect at different wavelengths. So this work has been published in a journal called Industrial Crops and Products. And what you do is you scan across the whole spectrum, but then focus on a narrow band of light which is the chemical signature, the spectral signature for each leaf. And then obviously the clever work is knowing the mathematical traits and things like that. So you could potentially predict the cannabinoid profile weeks before you harvest it. And you could then plan what you're going to do with the crop, or, you could sell it based on this. So you could sell your crop based on its THC or CBD or other cannabinoid concentration. And if you're growing things like hemp or CBD, where you need to know the THC is below a certain limit, that could also be important. So this is an area I think will rapidly increase. And, so one area to watch. So is it the same for all strains of legal cannabis? And could you use it on seedlings to faster breed strains that were extremely potent? So you could screen 10,000 very, very small seedlings for a very specific cannabinoid. Now, it could be THC or CBD, it could be CBG, or some really obscure one that you struggle to identify and characterize in a lab. And also, it takes ages to get all these mature plants to flowering and fruiting and to curing and extraction. You just do a hyperspectral image. You can determine the concentration of this cannabinoid, and away you go. Remove all the seedlings that were not high in that, and then go again with those plants and take them to maturity, use them for breeding. And so potentially could massively speed up the breeding of legal cannabis crops tremendously. Now, this obviously requires a hyperspectral camera, but could you get away with using your smartphone? And that brings me on to the second piece of research that I have uncovered this week, and that was brought to light by a slug network I'm involved with, because I'm involved in a research project where they scan fields for slugs using hyperspectral cameras. But one of them forwarded a interesting paper this week, which I'm going to go into now. And this is an article in IEEE Spectrum, and it says the Purdue University researcher Young Kim, that's his name, that's not like his rapper name, Young Kim, and his team have combined computer vision, color science, and optical spectroscopy to create an algorithm that recovers detailed spectral information from conventional photographs. And he says that in contrast to the human eye, which picks up red, blue, and green in the visible range, off-the-shelf smartphone camera sensors are potentially hyperspectral in nature, meaning that each pixel is sensitive to far more spectral bands than we can actually see on the screen. And scientists have now found a simple way for any conventional smartphone camera to serve as a hyperspectral sensor. And what they do is they place a card with a chart on it within its view. So you have the picture of, say, the plant or the slug in this case, with this chart, and it potentially turns it into a hyperspectral camera. So it's a patent pending technique. So you can't just copy this. You could copy it, but they'd have to find out and sue you and know that you were copying them. That's the problem with patents. So you could potentially get around it that way. But yeah, then you couldn't commercialize it. The new patent pending technique may find applications in defense, security, medicine, forensics, agriculture, environmental monitoring, industrial quality control, and food beverage analysis. Basically, anywhere we use hyperspectral analysis. It's been used in agriculture for a while, hyperspectral imaging. I used it back in 2016 for looking at pest and disease outbreaks in potato crops. And we flew a drone with a hyperspectral camera, a very expensive hyperspectral camera from Finland, up in the James Hutton Institute up in Dundee. Bit of a washout that study, but yeah, so potentially your phone can turn into a hyperspectral camera. You can buy phones, or you used to be able to buy phone add-ons, like JCB phones with infrared cameras on them. I don't know if you can still buy them, but if you're looking to look at how hot your plants, how stressed they were, then you could see how hot they are, the leaf temperature compared to the surroundings. That's another good use of smartphones and spectral imaging on smartphones. Get a infrared imaging attachment to your smartphone, and you can see how stressed your plants are, how water stressed they are in your environment. But back to hyperspectral imaging. One of the examples they show is a iPhone with a tiny little, it almost looks like a piece of modern art. It's like a matchbox-sized image. I'm trying to think of the artist who does it. Damien Hirst. It's like a Damien Hirst picture with all little pixels and colours, and then a glass of whiskey. And obviously whiskey's massive in Japan. And the research can image the transmission spectrum of high-end whiskies, thus determining its authenticity. So if you buy a bottle of whiskey that's extremely expensive, you can just use this really simple method to see whether it is actually what they say it is. And having mentioned high-end artists like Damien Hirst, this technique can actually be used to look at pictures in art galleries and see if they're actually authentic, whether the pigments are actually the same paints used by that artist or whether they're a fake. So another interesting use of hyperspectral imaging. And the authors acknowledge that there have been previous attempts to use smartphones to get hyperspectral images, but often these involve inaccuracies or bulky additions to the smartphone, extra pieces of kit you have to bolt on, like I said, for that infrared one. So potentially this could include infrared and ultraviolet and all the other spectrums and wavelengths. Obviously, it's probably you need the special card to put next to your plant, and you will need an app that can have the algorithms in and all the data, and the data from the previous study on cannabinoids. So certainly not something that's coming anytime soon, but it's not beyond the wit of man to create a app and a card that you could put in front of a cannabis plant, and it could tell you the cannabinoid concentration at harvest, which is amazing to think. It can't be done today, but it could be done tomorrow if everyone in the world put their minds to it, which is probably not going to be a priority. Probably solve the war in Ukraine or the problem in Gaza first before we go on to determining that. But it is possible. So it's not impossible, which is really interesting, and could be around the corner if some clever bods get together and take all these technologies from these different companies and researchers and put them together in one smartphone application. Would require someone from outside of these teams to do it because the focus of the Purdue team will probably be in medical applications to begin with. It's not going to be cannabis breeding, certainly not, even if it is legal. So, but something to think about. If you've got an interesting take on this, if you think I've got something wrong or you'd like an addition or a correction, then let me know. If you found this podcast interesting, then please do leave an Apple podcast review because it helps share the show and the topic of hydroponics with the wider community tremendously. If you're not listening on Apple Podcasts, don't bother leaving a review because it doesn't help share the podcast. But do make sure you click follow so you don't miss an episode. And if you're interested in novel technology, check out utrema.co.uk because we have a completely unique range of fertilizers, biostimulants, and biopesticides that you won't find available from any other manufacturer. And we sell into arable, horticulture, sports turf. So whatever you're doing, if you're using crop inputs and plant health products, we've probably got an innovative solution to solve one of your key problems of production. And just like the slug people I talked about, we've got a liquid slug product, a ferric phosphate in us. And we're the only people to create a soluble liquid ferric phosphate product. And we do that because slugs don't tend to stay around long on the ground where slug pellets go. They tend to go into the soil, on the plant, eat the roots. And so a liquid you can get anywhere where the slugs are, whereas pellets you can't. So hence the reason I'm involved in a slug project. But that's enough on that. It's not got much to do with hydroponics because we don't get many slug problems in hydroponics, although we did get one case, didn't we, previously? We did an episode on a grower that was inundated with slugs in their hydroponic NFT system. But that's enough rambling from me today. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast and I'll see you again tomorrow. Goodbye.